as you mentioned, I mean, it makes a decent first pass or first draft or starting point, but we need to layer on our own individual experience on it to make it useful.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Business Briefs, where you get bite-sized legal and business tips and strategies on a weekly basis. And I have today the very talented, the very intelligent Erin Austin of Think Beyond IP. I've had the privilege of having her before on, Law Chat with Girija. And we've also hosted a panel together for Women's Future Conference, which was a lovely conversation about law. And today I'm having her back to have a chat with us more about copyright, but specifically more about AI and copyright, because AI is definitely a thing. It's definitely something that is on everybody's mind right now, especially with all these new software that's coming out, and it's easily tangible and accessible. So welcome to Business Briefs, Erin. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you for having me back. This is going to be a great conversation.
I know. And I know that this was a little bit of a surprise for you.
Hey, AI all day, every day. It's all good.
I know. I feel like the other day, one of my brother goes to me, he goes, "So are you an expert in AI now?" I'm like, "I'm not yet, but I feel like I know more than the average person. So you can definitely ask me questions right now."
Although it is hard to keep up. So it's
so hard.
By the time this comes out, who knows what, will have happened.
It's like technology, because it's ever changing. My computer I buy today, it's going to be, a dinosaur in 6 months. Yeah. It is what it is. And so you have to keep up with it. And so tell us, Erin, a little bit about your company, what you do.
Yeah. So I'm the founder of Think Beyond IP. I am a lawyer who specializes in helping experts turn their expertise into intellectual property so they can increase their income and their impact. And I mostly like to do it through education. I am kind of my own avatar. Lawyers tend to have our one-on-one kind of hourly based business model. And this process for me has been, kind of figuring out, what's the best way for me to help the most people realize the value in their expertise-based businesses so they can use them not just for earning an income, but also to be wealth builders. And for me, that means using my IP experience to help them create, IP-based revenue streams.
I just love that, because I think IP, which means your trademark, your copyright, your patents, other trade secrets, things that are like adding value, but really are not tangible per se. Yeah. And in the past, you called it cerebral property. Like it's just cerebral stuff that's behind the scenes, which I loved when you said that in their last conversation. And it's truly that. And it actually is a hidden asset that a lot of people overlook in their business, especially if you're not a novice business owner, but even if you're not like, somebody in a corporate 9-to-5 where they're constantly talking about this stuff.
Right.
And so I truly love that. And talk a little bit about copyright. What exactly is that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, copyright is one of the categories of intellectual property which are protected by intellectual property laws, which basically gives a ownership rights and exploitation rights to the owner of that asset. So in copyright, we protect the original expression of ideas or concepts under copyright law. And so when we have that original expression, then we have the exclusive right to make copies of it, distribute it, make derivatives of it. By derivatives, I mean, if I write a script, then a derivative would be the movie. And that ownership and those rights attached at the moment of creation. So as soon as I put pen to paper and I create an original idea, not if I, write 10 times, but I create original idea, then I am the copyright owner and my copyright attaches at the time of creation. If I'm a painter, when I put, paintbrush to canvas, as a photographer, I click the shutter. As a sculptor, I put chisel to marble. I can't do any of these things, of course, except write. But we are creating copyrights in particular. I mean, intellectual property generally. But when we are in the expertise-based business, you and I, we are creating copyrighted material right now. As we are. So this podcast will be is copyrightable material. And when you are providing services for your clients, if there's a deliverable, chances are that's a copyrightable material. Who owns it will depend on your contract, of course. Yeah. But when we, put something on LinkedIn, and it's original, then that is also something that is eligible for copyright protection. So we need to, think about our copyrights as kind of all of the use of our intellect. I think that's what I said. When the, intellectual property is the product of our intellect. So when we're using our intellect, we're probably creating intellectual property, and for our type of business, copyright usually.
Absolutely. And some of the things that also are part of it are your blogs, are also your social media content that you're putting out there on Instagram, Facebook. Could it also be courses that you're creating?
Absolutely.
And photographers, or if you're a graphic novelist, or if you're a novelist in general, writing, long, short stories, whatever. And all these things are part of copyright, the world of copyright. Yes. There are exclusive rights that are attached to the copyright that you have. Right. And then there's exceptions out there too. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people use the exception, which is the funniest one to me, well, because I know better, that's why. But it's on Google. That means it's public.
Oh boy. Yeah.
It's on Google, so it's public, therefore it's fair use. Like And I kid you not, I just went to a conference. Oh my gosh, I was like blown away with the nonsense coming out of some of these brands. The brands were talking like this. It was a pretty like social influencer / marketers / writers. And it was a really amazing conference that I went to. Some of the brands that were speaking actually said stuff like this. Well, so the person was saying, well, I tagged the brand, but then the brand said that they have right to use it because I tagged them. And the brand agent person was like, of course, I think that sounds right. Erin, had to raise my hand at that very moment and correct the nonsense that was being spread, because I'm like, that's not true.
Right.
That's not true at all. And unfortunately, people are losing their rights because of the crazy information that's wrong. So can you explain to us a little bit more about the exceptions and what that kind of...
Yeah. I mean, just to speak quickly to your experience, I imagine people are thinking back to when they were writing papers for school and you just had to put, footnotes in where you got something and then it wasn't plagiarism. But that's not the same thing that we're talking about with commercial use of somebody else's intellectual property rights. So they have that exclusive ownership is theirs, whether or not if they post it on the internet, that does not defeat their exclusive rights. So the exclusive rights would be, I would say it's still exclusive rights, but you can use with fair use, you're able to use someone else's intellectual property rights, but it has to fall within some pretty narrow parameters. And by the way, fair use is a defense. It is not a right. And so the only way to make sure that to find out it was fair use, it means that you won a court case. So I am not a fan of ever relying on fair use unless, you are in fact, writing, doing something in academia. And then, gosh, that would be my own exclusion. What do you consider an exclusion?
Fair use is there. Fair use is also, I want to say
public, if you're talking about public domain.
Yeah, public domain.
So also once something, so copyrights do expire after a time. And so they keep getting bumped up because our good friends Disney keep expanding the term. But generally, I believe when it's a corporation is the copyright owner, I believe it's 90 years from creation. And for a person, it's like their life plus some number of years. And I'd have to look at those numbers. But they do expire after a while. And so then it falls into the public domain. Public domain is not the same thing as public or published. So it can still be public and published on the internet. But that does not mean it's in the public domain. Public domain is something very specifically meaning that it is no longer protected by intellectual property laws because they have either expired or they've lost them for some reason, like, what happens with trademarks that become generic.
Exactly. And I'm so glad you said that because again, just because it's on Google or Facebook or Instagram or any other thing that seems very public because everybody's using it, please understand that there is a private company that owns that platform. And so they can have rules that are also not abiding by the First Amendment, your freedom of speech, FYI. And so I think we just get it all so confused because it's so easily accessible and so many people are using it.
Right.
Now, the reason I'm even a little bit, kind of getting into the nitty gritty of this is because I really want to talk more about the AI situation, but how it relates to copyright. And so before we go into the AI conversation, I really wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about derivative versus transformative, because that is actually a distinguishing factor on whether someone can use somebody else's copyright versus they cannot.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, generally, I would say that something is transformative versus being derivative if it has so changed the original material that you haven't interfered with the market for the original material. And so, for instance, if I have been influenced by something that I read, but I've created so much additional information, I've changed it enough that someone would still be interested in the original materials. Mine is a kind of different and additive, but you'd still get value from going back to the original source. So let's say I have included some portion of it. I've written another book and I've incorporated some portion of the original one. And again, it's a matter of fact to be determined by a court, like whether or not it's transformative or not. But have I taken so much that no one needs to go read that original book anymore? And so have I transformed it enough that their original work is still hasn't lost its value because of what I've done with it? Versus again, the derivative that we talked about briefly, taking a book and turning it into a movie that is clearly taking the original ideas and you're putting it in a different format. But that would be considered derivative and not transformative. And so I couldn't make a movie off of someone else's book and say that it's transformative.
Absolutely. Because sometimes I don't go back and read the book. I'm just like, oh, I saw the movie and we're good.
Exactly. A lot of people think that they know something because they've read the movie, but
No, I mean, back in the day, we used to love those things too. So now moving forward to the whole AI conversation, and of course, that is on everyone's mind because it's truly the newest thing that's happened in technology. When we are thinking about AI, just going to the basics, is anything generated or created by AI protected by copyright?
Generally, no, because the way the U.S. copyright laws are right now, that it has to be created by a human, and so an AI is not created by a human. So basically, and this is actually, I think, changed since the last time I had a conversation about AI, because ChatGPT, even a week ago, was just based on the database of information that OpenAI, fed it. So it did not have access to the internet. And so it just this is the bucket of information that has been fed into its database. And when you ask it a question, it draws on that database to come up with your answers. And so that's not original. They're scraping their database to get the answers for it. And so, and there is if you'll look at the terms and conditions of ChatGPT, it will tell you, user beware, that we are not making any representations about whether or not this is, copying something completely that they found in their database, or if they've, used their, whatever their magic is that happens in there to create something that's a little bit different. You don't know that without doing your diligence about the source of what gets spit out there. Currently, I believe they've now connected it to the internet, and so that you'll have real-time information, the same as if you were going onto Google. But really, people are more afraid of this, but at the end of the day, it's just another way of searching the internet. It's a better way. Well, I'm going to make the analogy to Westlaw and LexisNexis, where you could ask it kind of questions and it could, in the way that you searched it depended on what came out.
Yeah.
And so same thing with ChatGPT. If you're at all on social media, you'll see all these hacks about the best way to get what the prompts need to be in order to get the best information out of your chats. And so, but at the end of the day, it is, asking someone a question. They're searching their database and providing that information, but without any representation of originality. And so at the moment, that's not something that you can just use as your own just because you put in a chat.
Exactly. And so ChatGPT is just one form of AI software out there. And now a lot of existing software have already integrated some form or fashion of AI into their services or applications as well. And I think one of the big things that when I'm, on the streets, I'm just kidding, like, when I'm in like conferences or when I'm talking to people, one of the big concerns that everyone gets is, number one is, oh goodness, is AI going to take our jobs? And what is your thought on that?
Yeah. I mean, again, it's the same place that if you have a job that someone could just do a search and they could provide the same value by doing a search that you provide doing your job. I mean, I'm going to say that maybe they could, but I'm going to assume that we are all experts who are listening here. We all have some level of expertise, and we use our combined, years of, experience, not just what is in our kind of database, but it's part of our, like, I've noticed that when I'm in this circumstance, then it works better if I do this. I notice when I'm in a room full of people, if I do this, I get better engagement. I've noticed that if the person I'm sitting across the table with is, feeling under the weather, that there's a way for me to interact. There's a human part of everything that we do that's just not about what we know or what we wrote our thesis on. There is the politics of a thing, right? Like, and then I don't just mean that in the kind of macro way, but just the micro way of the politics of a room, of reading a room, of knowing the culture of a business. Like, these are all things that are unknowable to AI. And that's, the value that we bring as not just knowledge workers, but as human beings.
Absolutely. I think it's the EQ that is absolutely missing in AI. Again,
yes, EQ. Thank you.
It is just, a source that's spitting out information. And that's why I'm always like, it's not going to take your job. And I was just speaking to you earlier about this prior to us recording. I was attending a conference last week in one of our, like, Houston's, startup hub, and it's called Activate Ion. And they had a panel of people, speaking about ChatGPT. And one of the panelists said it was like probably the biggest takeaway and the best analogy is that back in the day when we got a washing machine for doing our dishes, it didn't replace the human. It just facilitated the human's task. So it's taking away the menial task and making it quicker and better, where you just have to put it in there and then it does the work for you. But you still need that human touch to make it work. You still need a human intellect and intelligence and intuition and, reading the room, like you said, to make it work. Because if I don't press it properly, it's not going to work. So similarly, even with, software such as ChatGPT, or, if you're using Canva and you use, AI part of Canva also, you still have to have that human touch to it. Does this make sense?
Right. Absolutely.
This paragraph makes sense. Is this accurate? Is this credible? So it kind of goes into what are some of the responsibilities that if we are using AI, and how do we use it in a way that is responsible and sustainable, where we're not abusing it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you mentioned, it makes a decent first pass or first draft or starting point, but we need to layer on our own individual experience on it to make it useful. From a purely legal perspective, we've talked about the fact that it could very well have copyright infringements, include copyrighted materials in there that are owned by third parties. So as a starting point, you need to make sure that you need to do your diligence there. There are some programs that you can run. I know that Grammarly does it. There's some that you can make sure that there's nothing in there that is just lifted wholly from a third-party source. But when you are presenting something as your own work, like let's say you're using it in your job, most employers, if they haven't yet, they're starting to put some policies in place about how you can use AI in the workplace. Certainly in law firms, they're saying, you have to be very careful because your search terms that you put in can become part of the database and people can learn from what you're doing. And so if you have confidentiality obligations with respect to whatever you're inquiring about, then you would be breaching those confidential obligations if you're putting certain details into an AI product. Some places will have their own internal, so that's kind of a closed environment. But if you're using one that is publicly available, then you are in most likelihood breaching those confidential obligations. Yeah, so those are a couple to really be aware of.
That's actually such a great point, because not just lawyers, we have legal privilege with our clients, but then even when you have contracts and you're in confidentiality clauses that you've signed your life away to in that contract,
yes.
and you're putting some sensitive information unknowingly into these forums or platforms that take your information. So I always say, please read your terms and conditions of any AI that you're using, because the whole concept of AI is that where you are scraping the information that you've already aggregated, spitting it back out. Like that's all you're doing. It's nothing new generated, new research. That's nothing. New research is done by humans. And so, and so it's literally, I feel like at the end of the day, we have to be the gatekeeper of what is the truth and what is right, as opposed to just, taking what's being given to us. It's funny, I've been, on the Facebook groups, the legal Facebook groups that are out there. A lot of people are like, oh, what is this ChatGPT? Let's try this out for, our own case law research, instead of going to Westlaw and, what you were saying earlier about LexisNexis and all. And some of them were like, what? Does this case even exist? Like, how is this so on point to what I need? And it didn't exist. It's literally fabricating information. It's creating stuff that does not exist.
Yes, they call it hallucinations. That happened to me once. Yes, where I was reviewing a contract for a client, and it came from my client's client, and they were trying to use their version of the law. And my client wanted to use, our local law. And so I'm like, okay, I need similar law, but for this state instead of that state. And I just put that in a chat. I just learned about it. It was literally the day after I'd like, what is this ChatGPT?
Yeah.
And so I put in there, like, what is the, a law consistent, but under this state that's consistent with, and I had the statute from the other state. And it spit out something didn't exist. I'm like, oh, okay, here it is. I put it in my search, but I did go to Google with it. Like, oh, that's not it,
Beware.
And so you do.
So that's a big thing. Be aware of the credibility that's coming out of it, right?
Yes.
You have to double check it. You have to make sure that you're not stealing somebody else's already existing copyright either. You have to make sure you're not disclosing information that you're not supposed to be disclosing, because inadvertently you might be breaching an existing contract or legal privilege that you have. And then I feel another thing that also that, I really want to hit on is that when you're using ChatGPT is one thing. There was this case that I talked about a while ago about this woman who, I forgot her name, not Anastasia, I want to say, but she created a graphic novel in a community that was an AI built community where there were graphic novelists creating AI graphic novels. And she then went in and got a copyright. She registered for a copyright. This copyright office gave her a copyright, but then they rescinded it like within 30 days, stating that this is 100% created by AI, therefore it's not protected by a copyright.
Right.
And so that kind of is such a prime example of how you should not use AI.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's not a derivative, of course, right? It's also so that's what I want to talk about, like the derivative and transformative part of this aspect also. Say someone goes in and is now in this platform, right? And they're kind of using it for inspiration. They're kind of using it as the base level of starting point. But then, and I don't know if you know the answer, because law is changing and we're all trying to figure it right now. And so this is so much more in theory than actual yes or no. There's no black and white right now on this. But what if, like, say they're using that baseline for the AI generated, is there, but then they're taking it and creating something out of it. They're writing their own words, they're writing their own chapters. At what point does that become theirs and human versus, like, and for a more practical sense, forget a book. Like, yes, books, you have all these like agencies and all working and publishing companies working on that. But what about blogs? What about content? I mean, everyone's wanting to create social media posts through AI, but it's like, but then if you want to go for whatever purpose to go protect it, it's the next level of protection. Can you?
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's an AI issue. I'm going to tell you what my point of view about, registering things in copyright and what you're going to enforce. And, if it is not so original and not so valuable that you wouldn't be willing to go to court to enforce it, then, register it or don't register it. It's not, but there's a lot of stuff that we create. I mean, I create content every day. I bet you create content every day. Not all of it is that valuable. I'm not registering stuff every day. And so it doesn't mean it's not mine. It is, because that's what the law says. But will I, go to the mats to enforce it if somebody steals it? Very little of what I create falls into that bucket. And so I think if you're getting things, if, let's say you're using AI to, you say like, okay, AI, give me, 12 blog post ideas so that you've got one for, every once a week for a quarter. And then you use it to then create the blog post. And then you take that and you put it in your voice because you've got your own voice. So you do the tweaks to make it in your own voice and you publish them on your blog. And, is that something that you could register in the Copyright Office? Well, I think you could, because I don't think the Copyright Office will audit it. I thought it was interesting, the story about the images, but typically the Copyright Office does not audit what you registered. You just, okay, great. And they goes into the file, and if there's unless somebody disputes it, then it just sits there. And so I think it will get registered, but will it be anything that's valuable enough to enforce against a third party's use? That to me is always where the, rubber hits the road for me. So
that's a really interesting point of view, and also very practical. And I like it because you're really looking at it from the lens of practicality.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, honestly, like, not everything you don't need to be fighting for everything, especially if it's not a revenue earner or my big thing is if it's a revenue earner or a converter for you, then yes, please protect it with all your willpower. But got it. But if it's just something that's just kind of in the parts of your flow, and of course, if it's not super original, it's okay also.
Right.
And it's, it's interesting because when you are doing copyright registration, there's a part of it where you have to say if any part is not yours or if it's somebody there, and you are also, pledging, you're affirming everything. It's like you're affirming to everything, attesting that everything that you're saying is truthful. Just in case if you think that you can just put it in there. No, you're like writing your name saying that I attest everything being truthful. And so, in the event that something crazy were to happen and it comes out that you were not being honest about it. And so, but there are parts and parcel of the application where you do have to show that what you are saying is truthful, and you also have to show any part of it was not yours. And hopefully you are being honest about that. Which then it takes me another question. Should we disclose on our websites or anything that, hey, this is AI generated? I'm wondering about that. I'm wondering, there's an ethical thing and then there's a legal thing, right? And sometimes they don't always match. And
would you, if you use a copywriter, would you disclose that you used a copywriter? I don't think so. That's,
But see, for me, the defining line on that is that when I have hired someone to create content for me, it is still being created with me, with my eyes on it. But at the end of the day, there's also a contract between that person and myself where I own everything. And so I can legitimately, confidently say that this is mine. Whereas I don't do that with anything that's created with AI. Like it's not mine. In fact, the terms
Yeah,
are
well, we started with the assumption that you're going to do your diligence. If you get something off of AI, that you're going to do the diligence to make sure that it's not something that's just been lifted from somebody else, and that we have, done the minimum amount of putting it into so it's consistent with the rest of our work product. And under those circumstances, yeah, I mean, because at the end of the day, it's about the value to the reader. I'm very practical in this one. It's about the value to the reader. Is it valuable to the reader? And have I not, obviously stolen anybody else's work? So with those assumptions, does it matter if it's AI generated?
no.
Yeah.
So recently, I'm just really like, these are things that pop into my mind.
Yeah.
Others talking. And I have friends who've used it for presentations in their businesses or in their company, like they're working for somebody. And if I hire someone and they're creating a presentation, I assume that it's an original work. Like I'm assuming, yes, I know you've done research. Yes, I know you've plugged and played, and I know all of that has happened because I've done that, right? Like we're doing that and we're paraphrasing and whatnot. I get it. But if it's a wholly 50%, maybe not 50, but maybe like 75% or more, if it's created by AI, I would surely want to know that, hey, my employee did not do this, but an AI did it before I start giving all the fame to claim to like, for my employee in the sense of value that they're adding as an individual. I don't know. This is like
no. You said a couple of things. No, those are important points. I'm going to say there's a couple of things.
Like as if they're the individual adding the value, but actually there's a whole other thing back here that they're now plagiarizing, in my opinion. That's what I think. I'm like plagiarizing. That's what it is.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think let's start with if somebody comes to me and they're doing a presentation, like they're at my symposium and they're doing a presentation and it was created with the use of AI. Well, somehow this person had the reputation to get invited, and maybe they used AI for this particular one, but there should be some part of their thought leadership that's going into that is the reason they were invited in the first place. Now, I would say that is very different than if I've been hired to create deliverables for a client and I have signed an agreement that says everything that I deliver to you is original. Then I think that's absolutely. And they will, maybe there's something that needs to be added to the ownership and IP provisions. When you have a software product, it's very common to say like there's no open source stuff in there, right? And now with deliverables for just a standard services agreement, maybe we need to now say, and it's all original and it hasn't been developed with AI. I like that.
Yeah, and I've actually thought about including them in my contracts anyways, because I'm just like, as a
or at least it's disclosed.
Yeah, disclosure needs to be there. Or if you are absolutely like, I would actually in my business, like I would be like, please don't use AI unless I've asked you to use it. This absolutely needs permission from my end. And I don't know, maybe I'm just like, I don't know, maybe I'm super conservative about this. Maybe, I don't know, but I'm also very protective of my IP. I want to be very protective about it. And I almost feel like we should err on that side, especially if that's what you do all the time. Like that's all you're doing all day long. And like you said earlier, I like how you brought the practical sense to it too. If it just doesn't matter, if it's not a value that much, know to which battles to pick. But yeah, I absolutely am now adding those clauses into the contracts that I'm writing for my clients, because unless they don't want it, then it's fine. But I feel like we have to also be updated and kind of let our clients know about these things, because business owners don't know. They only know the basic. They only know what seems intuitive. But sometimes law is not intuitive. It's absolutely counterintuitive.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the only thing I want to make sure we don't forget is that all of this applies now. Like even without the specific reference to AI, it still applies because people are still using Google as a starting point, right? Yeah. And so they still need to make sure that if they're getting something from another source, that either they are disclosing it or they have so transformed it that it is original. If someone is, required to do some sort of, strategic analysis of the market. Obviously, they'll be using some third-party research to inform that. And then, they're having their own original insights or something, or maybe they're creating marketing materials based on that. That still has to have that original layer on top of it. And that's true whether they're using Google or using AI, that those rules still apply. So,
exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And of course, I am going to state the date because it is 24th of May, 2023.
Exactly. That's why we're like, what's going on?
6 months from now, things might be different with technology. But going back to the basics of copyright, that has been longstanding for many long years.
Yes.
Changing anytime soon either, from all the articles I've read, and then also from conversations amongst other practitioners. That only is changing. So there you go.
Yeah. I think, yes. Not for a while yet. I do wonder if they'll at some point,
Yeah,
maybe some AI who's in charge will change the rules, but we'll see how that goes.
I love this. I feel like that could be a whole nother conversation. Which side do you stand on? I feel like I'm super conservative, and I feel like you're treading on the. This is great. Let's make AI everything. Anything made it by AI should be protected. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. I feel like this was a great chat. I hope everyone listening also, there's a lot of takeaways from here.
Yes.
A lot of things to ponder on, because honestly, I don't think any one practitioner, especially in IP, would really know the answer, because this is ever changing. So we're always deferring to what's already here and existing and applying that law to what's going on today, unless something new pops up and then all of a sudden law changes overnight. But right now, this is where we are. Erin, thank you so much for joining us today on Business Briefs. This was awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. A lot of fun.
Yeah.
A lot of great stuff came up.
And then how can we reach out to you? I'm going to put all the links to our show notes and stuff as well.
Yeah, thanks. So I hang out on LinkedIn. I am, like I say, the OG Erin Austin. And so you can find me on LinkedIn. Also, I have a podcast called Hourly to Exit that you can find on all your podcast providers. And then I'd love to have you join my email list that you can also find at thinkbeyondip.com.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your thoughts. And thank you for the laughs.
Thank you.